Let's all get a songbook. Turn to page number 79. I think I had Jim turn this down last week. Number 79. We turned it down on Sunday, Jeff. We've got him fooled back there. I think some of you's got tired of hearing me sing, so you went back there and messed with it on this. Anyhow, we'll turn to page 79. We'll sing the first, second, and last verse. My Jesus, I love thee. I know thou art mine. For thee all the follies of sin I resign. My precious Redeemer, my Savior art thou. If ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. I love thee because thou hast first loved me and purchased my pardon on Calvary's tree. I love thee for wearing the thorns on thy brow. If ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. In mansions of glory and endless delight, I'll ever adore thee in heaven so bright. I'll sing with the glittering crown on my brow. If ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. Brian, why don't you open with a word of prayer for us? Amen. Well, it's good to see everybody here. I see a psalm book opened up here, so I'm thinking maybe Brian or somebody tried to send me a message. This is what I want you to sing tonight, and we didn't do it. Which one of you put it up here? Was it you? Come on, somebody confess. Okay, I don't know either one of the songs it's opened up to, so. Well, we're glad to have you here. Does anybody notice anything different in here tonight? Anything seem different? Brighter. There you go. See? I went in and we ordered extensions for all of these lights, and I put all them in today, so it brought it down to a little closer to the level. So it's those same lights, just a little bit closer out to the edge, and now it seemed like it brightened everything up, I thought. And I've been planning on doing that for a long time, just never got it done, but we got it done today. But we're glad you're here. I don't know anything else to tell you. There's a lot of stuff coming up. My wife's got a table set up back there in the back for our missions conference coming up, and we're going to have on that week of the missions conference, we're going to have a meal on Monday, and we're going to have three. We have a speaker, and then we have three missionaries who are going to be here that week. Folks going to the field on deputation. One family is going to Greece. One family is going to Germany. and one family is going to Peru. And so the Peru family will not be here on Monday because they have another meeting that night, but they'll be here Tuesday and Wednesday. But on Monday, we're going to have a meal before the service. We'll start about 6. That ought to give us time to get over here by 7. And if you would like to help, there's all kinds of things back there. There's papers, and my wife will be back there at the table. You can show, if you'd like to help. We need a lot of people to get involved. And for one, that meal is going to involve some kind of dish. She's looked them up, and something they eat in Germany, something they eat in Peru. If you want to try to make one of those, the recipes are there and everything. You just put it together. If I was doing it, I'd put it together and try it at home, see if I pass out in the next half hour. If not, I'd say, okay, we'll take it in and let them try it. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but yes, we're looking forward to that. We're gonna have a great missions conference, I think, and we found a few things that we want to do, and we're going to do some decorating, and she may need some help with that. So if you want to help in any way, you see my wife, she'll be back there again on Sunday if someone wants to help in any way with that. I think that's all the announcements I had to tell you for now. How about a prayer list? Everybody got February prayer list? It's almost so bright I can almost see everybody in here. I did add a couple that a young lady we pick up and her brother, I don't know her brother's name. Her name is Adrian. He just came last week for the first time, but they were sick tonight when I went to pick them up, so they couldn't come. So they asked if we'd pray for them. So I told them we would. So I put them on the right ends. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We have his dad on the salvation list, but remember to pray for him. He's in the hospital also. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Now on the 21st. Okay, let me write that date down. We've got him here on our list. Mr. Brown. I'm trying to find him on the list. I've got him on here. Oh, I've got him on. How did I get him on that list? I'll blame that on Ashley because she's not in here tonight. I just give her my stuff and have her type it. She tries to read my writing. It's a shame. She'll call me. She'll say, I don't know what this says. And so I look at it. I don't know what it said either. I wrote it on there, but I can't read my own writing. So we put Mr. Rich on here. Well, he's already on here, but continue to pray for him. They're working on all kinds of things at the same time. He got his skin cancer worked on, but he's 9 point something, he said last week, and that's been sticking in my mind when I've been praying for him all week. That's pretty high sugar. And so, now Vicki told me a long time ago he's very sweet, but I didn't realize what they was talking about, so that might be going too far. How many of you thought we was going to get a lot of ice? And you was really worried. There's a lot of people was worried about ice. People calling me, and I just looked at the radar, and the radar showed me the ice was going up north of Greencastle. So I figured as long as we don't have church up there, we'll be all right. So, yeah. So, yeah. Jeff may not make it home, but other than that, us folks that live down here, I think we're going to be all right. But yeah, the best I could see, it looked like all of it was going to be up there. So I thought, well, I think we're safe for tonight. Don't forget, this Sunday night, we have a group from West Coast Baptist College will be here. There's 4 I don't really know how. There's 4 young men. I don't know if it's just the 4s that sing. There's a gentleman that comes with them. He graduated from there. He is going to be speaking. But anyhow, they'll do an excellent job, and it'll be well worth your time Sunday night. So try to be here Sunday night, and urge other people. Maybe some people don't come back on Sunday night. It might be a good time to try it. Yeah, I'll guarantee it doesn't sound as good listening through YouTube as it does listening in person. But it is better than not hearing it at all. But try to come if you can, and it'll be worth it. So that's Sunday night. And then I just realized how we put a lot of stuff. We always keep the end of the year busy. Now we got the front of the year busy too, because after this Friday night, then next or this Sunday night, then next Friday we start. I think it's next Friday, and if I'm not mistaken, we have our couples retreat, and then we start our missions conference the following week. So a lot of things going on. So we need folks praying for all of it. The Lord will help us in all this and challenges. Anything else to pray about? I see Mr. Nate over here, and it just many of you don't know Nate very well. He don't speak a lot. He doesn't say a lot. He's quiet, kind of. But he's got a little humor behind him that I like, and some don't know it. And so every now and then somebody will get a text or something from him, and it kind of makes them nervous, and I really like that. Now, he's texted me a few times when I said something funny or off, and I realized he was making fun of me, which I like, but some people don't. And so I heard a little story about it this week, and it was funny. I said, "Oh, well, Nate got you then." So that's good. And yes, if you pick on people a little bit, you'll fit right in at Faith Baptist Church, because we do that around here. It seemed like a good way to do things. And even all the way back to my days in high school, some of the folks that go to this church, they would pull pranks on you and do things. I mean, some of the people in the leadership of the school, when I was there, trying to do a job there. So I had a job at the school, and I would work there, and I was trying to do a good job, trying to help them, and somebody stuck my arm into paint about right up into here one day, and I was just trying to do my job, and you see if you can figure out who might have been on that, but I won't tell you his name, but his initials is Coach Kiley, and yes, we had some. You ought to enjoy life. I just think you ought to enjoy life, and there's always something. And I got a lot of memories of things down through the years that I've laughed about. Sometimes I don't laugh at the time. It takes me a little while to laugh, but they're worthwhile. So keep a smile on your face. It's a good thing. Now, if you got your Bibles, let's turn to Romans chapter number 5. I want to see if this verse is true. Don't raise your hand if you think this verse is true of you, but I do want you to ask yourself, is this verse true of me? Because it's kind of an amazing verse in Romans chapter number 5. And verse number 3. I want to see if I got it right. Okay. Romans chapter 5 and verse number 3. Just think to yourself, don't raise your hand, but think to yourself, could I make this statement to somebody? If I met somebody, if I was talking to somebody in the office, could I make this statement? Here's what he says. And not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience. Could you say that? I glory, boy, I'm glad, man, I'm glad troubles came this week. I don't know if there was somehow he was able to say this and not out of context or whatever, but that's a tough thing to say. Last week we started studying about this thought of contentment. And you'd think 1 week would be long enough to talk about contentment, but it's not. We'll probably go on it maybe next week also. But one of the first questions that come to my mind that I asked last week was, what really could be a better quality to have than to be a person that people described as he was just a contented person? We often talk about that. I would tell people that you can see the grace of God or the confidence in them, but anyhow, no matter what comes along. I mean, look at the life of Joseph and of Moses and Paul, and you can't help but admiring their patience and their good attitudes. And I think about as I read through Moses was a prince, and Joseph, he was the son of a rich man, and Paul was a great scholar. And yet you look at the hard and tough lives that they were called to live. The prince, he becomes a shepherd. The son becomes a slave and a prisoner. The scholar becomes I don't know what better to call him, a vagabond preacher. He never gets married, doesn't have kids, doesn't have a fixed salary, but you don't hear him murmuring. You don't hear him complaining. Now, in fact, from Joseph and Paul, I don't find any complaining from either one of them. Now, Moses had a little bit of complaining and griping, but he was trying to deal with 2,000 or 2 million discontent Jews. So I'm sure I'd have probably griped in there a little bit somewhere too. But the contentment that we find in them is great, but it's not half the contentment you can find in another man. This man was also a prince and an heir and a scholar, but he finds himself poor and unpopular and unmarried and unappreciated and eventually crucified. Of course, we know we're talking about Christ, and he set the standard for being content. And he tells us how to live and dwell with what you have. Be content with what you have. If all you've got is God. In fact, I think I preached a message one time on it, and it's been rolling through my mind this week. I hear things, and I listen. Sometimes I'll hear complaints from different areas and different things, and I've got a title in my head. I just don't have a message to go with it yet, but I'm going to. But my thought is God enough? If that's all you had, is that enough? That's what Jesus said. And he's the one that calls us to contentment, and he calls all of us to it. And by his grace, I think that ought to be one of the things that we look for in our life, and we ought to find, in some measure, we ought to find some contentment. I think God's people, how much happier would we be if we learned to be content? How much more peaceful would our families be, would our churches be, if we just learned to be content? How much better would it be for us if you was trying to tell someone about Christ? I told a fellow this, we used to have here in this church, and he moved away, but he spent a lot of time complaining to people, and then he would try to tell these people about Christ right after that. And I told him, I said, if you go whining to people about everything and how miserable everything is and how awful things are, then don't tell them about Christ afterwards, because they're not going to listen to you. They don't see anything you've got that's worth that they would be interested in, but there are a lot of people do this, and so that we've been studying. Our thought was on contentment, and last week we saw that contentment is really is like an act of worship. In fact, I'll read some of what I said there. I said we worship God more when we're content than when we hear a sermon or spend an hour in prayer, or when we even come take up the Lord's Supper, or whatever, because it's from the heart. But could I tell you, that's a tough statement for me to say, because I'm a preacher, and I stress coming to church, coming to worship service, and I stress how important it is to hear the sermons, and I stress how important it is to read your Bible, and how important it is to take up the Lord's Supper and do all those things. And yet all these things, as good and great as they are, they're less dear to God than being content with what you've got, being content with what he's allowed in our life. And now, we shouldn't despise any of the outward things, but we got to remember that what we are matters more than what we do. And praying and reading the Bible and coming to church, those are good things. That's what we do. But being content is a better thing, because that's what we are. That's us. And so what makes it so excellent? Well, besides the fact that it is a way of worshiping God, here's something else that a preacher said. I wrote it down, and I'm going to use it for my thoughts tonight. But he says, in contentment there is much exercise of grace. There's much strength of grace. There's much beauty of grace. And I put these all together. Now, I'm going to try to explain what that means to me when I read that by using what the Word of God says. But most of us could see where there's strength in that. When you see a person that's going through things that you know would take you to the ground, and they're still trusting God, and they're still going on, and they're content, there's some strength to that. You can see that, and you can also see the beauty in it. But he starts off by saying there's much exercise of grace. I think I would have probably used the words, there's a great mixture of grace. And what I would mean by that is a person who has learned to be content wherever God's put them and with whatever God's given them in their life, that person has a lot of faith. They have humility. They have love, there's patience, there's wisdom, there's hope. There's just about anything you could name that also would run along with the fruit of the Spirit. They're all there. And there's some things you can do. I mean, you may maybe do this, a certain action, and that exercise one grace. Or, okay, that makes me a kindness. That shows more kindness. But in contentment, you exercise all these graces at once, is what he's saying. And I'm going to try to explain it a little bit different way, probably a silly way, but I think it makes it easier to understand. If you go to a health club, and they've got 2,000 machines in there, and you get on one of those machines. One of them might exercise your biceps, and another machine might help you with your calves, and another machine might help you with your lower back. And by using one of those machines, you can build up a part of your body. You can build up somewhere where you're weak, and maybe the doctor tells you you're kind of weak, you got some troubles here. And by using them all, you become more fit, a stronger person. But what if somebody come up with a machine that worked on everything all at once? Now, somebody probably has. I don't know, because I don't bother to go to those health clubs, but there's probably some in there. But what if there was some that it fix everything, that work on everything at the same time? You reckon they'd have a hard time selling it? Reckon if you was a person that was trying to stay fit, you would buy one of those? And what if they guaranteed it? Well, if they guaranteed it, I mean, they'd probably win a Nobel Prize and be a gazillionaire or something like that. But contentment is like that machine. It exercises all kinds of the grace of God in our life. And when you can be satisfied and thankful with God while you don't have the other things that you need or the other things that you want, but you're still satisfied and content with God, and that's where Paul was, and that's where a lot of these other people we read about in the Bible were, then you can build your faith and your humility and your hope and your patience and your gratitude. You can have all of that. But on the other side of that, discontentment, it weakens every bit of that. A person who's discontent with whatever God gives, and whether it be your family, whether it be your health, whether it be your church, whatever, your job, if a discontented believer, in fact, think of this. Think of one person you know that's a discontented Christian that's thankful. I can't think of any. Think of a discontented complainer that's humble. Doesn't happen. And how can we believe God's promises and still be unhappy with what he's not given us or has given us if we're unhappy? See, there's no contentment. So Christian contentment is a great thing because it pretty much includes all the other graces. And so from that, I could take what I would call a Bible doctrine, or what I believe would be that contentment is kind of like a window to our character. If I'm a person that just spends most of my time finding everything that's wrong, complaining about God didn't give me this, I don't think this is fair and this is right, it shows what's inside of me. And I don't want people to see something like that. If I'm going to represent Christ, I want to see somebody that's content with everything that God's done. And not just getting by, but I mean, I'm thankful for it. I'm grateful for what God's done. So I would tell people, don't tell others how pious you are if you're mad at God at the same time for not giving you more than he has given you, or for not giving you something different than he's given you. My mind goes back to a lady that was in our church years and years ago when we was over in the little building, and she pretty well every service she would find some way after church of letting everybody know how her husband didn't measure up to being what he should have been as a husband. And I was just a kid at the time. I did play the piano. That's about all the responsibilities I had in the church at the time. But I just remember as a kid, I thought, why would somebody? I mean, I wasn't married, but I thought I'm never going to marry somebody who's going to cut me down every time we have a service. But this lady was discontent in everything, and needless to say, eventually she left her husband, and I don't know anything that happened to her after that or him. But I'm saying, if you want to grow in grace, learn to be content, because it involves a whole lot of things. But he also said in there, there's a great deal of strength in contentment. And I'd have to think, well, there's probably nothing any more difficult to be than be content. And everything that happens in life gives us an opportunity to not be content. There's something, we could have been discontent just because there was a little bit of rain coming tonight, and some people that hit into the ice, they'd been a little more discontent, and so we could do that. And so a content Christian, they got a pretty strong character about them, pretty strong soul. But on the other side, one who's not content, it's like they're weak. They're sickly. They're not strong spiritually. They're not strong in any way. And no matter how much they know about the Bible, no matter how much they know about church or they're involved in church, but what it means to me is there's no reason why any of us should be weak, because he offers it to all of us, and it doesn't depend on gifts. It's not like, okay, if you're a gifted teacher, then you can be a strong Christian. Or if you're a gifted singer, you can be a strong Christian. Or if you're a great leader in the church, you can be a strong Christian. No, anybody can be a strong Christian. Just learn to be content. You say, preacher, I have little responsibilities in the church, and I don't have anything else I can do. Well, be content with it. It gives us strength. And you want to do something with your life, be content with what you have. You want to offer an outstanding service to the Lord, be content with what you have. You want to stand out from a whole lot of other Christians, be content with what you have. These are simple things, simple thoughts, but we need them because contentment is strength and discontentment is a weakness. And I thought of it this way. We're getting ready to have a missions conference. And in my mind, there's probably no more difficult responsibility in the world than to be a missionary. It's hard for me to imagine. I wouldn't mind. I've told my wife this 1,000 times. There's all kinds of churches in Florida that could use a preacher to come down there and fill in the pulpit. And I would love to do that, but I'd have to leave 10 grandkids up here, and I don't think I can do it. So how does a missionary pack up and leave his family and go to a country where they may not see him for 3 or 4 or 5 years? Sure, you can talk on the phone now, and you can Skype and whatever them things are that you can do. But you can talk to people, but so that's very difficult. And so I think of a missionary as one of the greatest servants of the Lord there is. But then I got to think about this when I was putting down the notes. Could I tell you that a contented housewife in Cloverdale, Indiana, is stronger than a discontented missionary in Papua New Guinea? That's the way God sees it, just because of contentment. And so why is it such a great thing? Well, because it's strong. And it's far stronger than doing big things, just being content with what God has allowed. Now, I'll say this more toward the end, but that doesn't mean I'm not talking about fate. I don't know if that's a word I want to use. I'm not talking about a person, well, this is the way it is. God give me this old car and it's never going to run, so I'm just going to keep driving like this. Well, go ahead and put some spark plugs in it every now and then and change some things. You can improve things, but I'm talking about it's even doing big things. Being content has more value in everything, even spiritual things. Doing something for Christ. The Bible says over in Proverbs chapter 16, I didn't write the exact verse down, but here's what it tells us. It says that he that ruleth his spirit is greater than he that taketh the city. Now, if you read the context of that, the primary meaning there has to do with controlling your anger, and that's a good thing. But what is this anger? What is anger? Well, that's because I'm discontent, and that's the way my discontentment in here works out. I get mad, and I blow up, and I do things, and because I blow up because I don't get what I want, and I pout because I'm not getting my way, and that's what we do. But when we're content, even though we didn't get our way, we have a business meeting, and I thought about this when I was writing this a few years ago. We built that gym. Well, when we built the gym, my mind was dead set. My parsonage sat there. I was living in it. And my mind was dead set that I needed to stay right where I was at, and we needed to enlarge the church we was in. And I was sure that the whole church thought that, and then they all voted, and it didn't go that way. Now, my first thought was, these people are all wrong. And then I thought, well, maybe the Lord is trying to tell me a little something. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to, if that's what he wants, then I'm going to be content with it. And I went with it. And you know what happened? A few years, not long after we got the parsonage tore down and we got the gym built, I got a phone call. This land that we're on right now was for sale. I've been trying to buy it for years, and they said, no, we will never sell to you. They called me and said, we'll sell it. And they give us a good price. And now we have a church here that we wouldn't have had if we'd enlarged that building over there another time. So the fact is, God knew what he was doing. I didn't see it. And so I didn't get my way, but I decided, you know what? must be what God wants, so I'm not going to complain about it. I didn't complain about it. And so my thought is simply this: if we can learn to be content, even when we don't get away, even when we don't get what we think we should have got, that person is more heroic than the great warriors who take the cities and build the empires. And that's what he's telling us in these verses. So contentment is excellent because it's strong. So if you want to impress people, don't tell people what you've done for God. Tell people how content you are with what God's done for you. That's what's impressive. But then he talks about beauty and contentment. The last year, my wife and I, we went out west, and we saw some amazing sights. Now, I can't name them all for you. In fact, I can't even name you the parks we went into because I already forgot the names of them. But they were amazing. Everything, the mountains, the caverns, the rivers, and just everything, they were amazing to us. But I got to thinking about this. If we see, I've never went to the redwood forest. I've heard people about it. And I will go someday if the Lord allows me to. But we see those big towering trees, or we see a giant waterfall, or we see some other natural wonder, and it just brings feelings of awe in us, feelings of amazement of a God But if the redwoods and the Niagaras make us that reverent, what should we feel in the presence of contentment when everything around us is not the way it ought to be? It ought to bring more awe to us. It ought to bring more amazement. And a contented man is a greater wonder than the oceans and the mountains and the thunderstorms, and because God's glory shines in contentment more than anything else, more than the sun and the moon and the stars. God's glory shines through people that are content. And so there is a beauty in contentment. And that's what I think he was saying when he made that statement. And beauty in being happy with what the Lord has given you and not complaining about what he's withheld from you. Sure, there's things. And I was thinking about some things today that I know some people really have prayed about and asked God about and poured their heart out to God about for years. And it doesn't look like God's going to open the door for that. But can they still be content? I think they can. I think they have been to a great extent. But still, it's difficult to do. And talking about this, it kind of reminds me of Joseph. And I mentioned him a minute ago, one of the great men of the Bible. Pharaoh valued his knowledge. The Egyptians valued his foresight. His family valued his mercy and his generosity. But you and I who've read the whole story of his life, I don't know about you, but I'm more impressed with his contentment. He spent a lot of years not getting what he wanted. A lot of years, God didn't explain to him what he was doing. He just trusted God. He just kept going, and he never complained. That's the thing. I read of no complaints of Joseph. And he was, you remember, he was the favored son of a rich man. Now, that wasn't his fault that his dad favored him, but it doesn't work good to favor your kids. You're better off to do like me. I don't like none of my kids. It's that way. There's no favoritism. But his dad favored him, but his brothers, because of it, hated him and envied him. But you never find him whining about it. He doesn't say anything, and he gets sold into slavery, and he becomes I don't know what you'd call, maybe a houseboy for Potiphar, but he's got a good attitude, and he moves up in the service. He moves him. It doesn't. Not long as he's at the bottom, he just moves right up the ladder, and then Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, and when he says no, he gets thrown in jail for what? Doing the right thing. Now he's in jail, and while he's in jail, he becomes kind of the trustee of the prisoners there. And while he's in jail, there's one of the high servants there to the king himself. He helps him in there. And he tells him, say, it helps him to get out. And he says, give a good word. Say a good word to Pharaoh for me when you get out. And so he did, but not for 2 years, because he forgot about him for 2 years. And finally, in 2 years, he brought it up. And then later, he has a chance to punish his brothers for the things they've done to him, but he won't do it. And the reason he gives, he said, you thought it for evil, but God thought it for good. He was content through that whole life. And that was not like a 6 months thing. That was, I can't remember now, I'm thinking around 13 years that this went on. And that's just a number off the top of my head, but it's at least 13. And that's an amazing thing to me. And you read in the Bible where it says it's something about he was a goodly man or something along those terms. He was a fine-looking man, handsome man. But could I tell you his greatest beauty? His contentment. He just trusted God no matter what happened. And that same gift of contentment that God gave Joseph, he offers to us. That same grace. As I mentioned it last week in that one book, it's called the Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. God says you can have it, and we need to have it. We need to grow in that grace. But how do we do it? Well, we have to remember some things. We have to remember what's in it, all of the graces, everything we'd say that's valuable in the Christian life. All of that's part of this contentment. And we have to remember how strong it is. It's stronger than the most celebrated acts of history is this grace of contentment. And then how beautiful it is. It's fairer than anything on earth. So here's my challenge for us again tonight. Do we have it? Do we have contentment? Now, I hate to say it, but I think there's times we have spells of contentment, but maybe it's because everything's going right. And then something starts not going right, and how quick do we revert and get off that contentment? And because it's really a command of God that's made to people who didn't have a whole lot. Well, when he tells those people he's writing here, and many times they didn't have very much, but he's telling them to be content. And I don't find in the Bible where he's ever changed that. He said, okay, now contentment days are done. You don't have to be content anymore. It's still there. and I think it will be there until he comes back. But are we content with what we have? Are we content with where we're at? And I did this last week, and I'll do it again in closing. Instead of being real general about it, I'll be a little more specific. Are you content with the marriage you're in, with the husband or the wife that you have? Or you say, well, I will be, preacher, as soon as he makes the changes I want him to make. Well, that's the way we think sometimes. Or as soon as she becomes the woman that I thought she was when I married her, then I'll be content. See, that's not contentment. But that's where we get to a lot of times. Or are we content with our children? Well, as soon as they start doing everything right. Well, I've never found a perfect child. There's not going to be any. But can we give God thanks for everything about them, even as they are right now? We ought to be able to. Are we content with our job, with our income that it brings? Are we content with our church? Church, there's all kinds of things wrong. And I'm not going to point out a lot of the things wrong that I do because you don't need any help. But yeah, we make a lot of mistakes and we make wrong decisions, and we try to have enough get-togethers and things so that when we make decisions, it's not a one person deciding something, and we don't make mistakes, but we still make mistakes. We do things wrong, and people could pick us to death if they wanted to. But if that's what we're doing, we're not getting anywhere if we're trying to do that. So are we content with the church? But here's what I want us to end with. Contentment does not contradict ambition. If you're content with your job, that doesn't mean if you have an opportunity to get a better job, you shouldn't do it. Some people take that contentment and I think they take it to the point of just being lazy and doing nothing. I don't think we ought to do that. And so there's nothing wrong with wanting a better job, or nothing wrong with wanting more income, or nothing wrong with wanting your spouse to be a better person. Pray for them, help them, encourage them. Nothing wrong with that. But here's where it becomes wrong. It becomes wrong when I cannot give thanks for what I have right now. When I can't tell God thank you for what's going on in my life right now and really mean it, then I'm a discontent person. Now, again, that doesn't mean it won't change. And tomorrow, something might come along. Tomorrow, there may be a church call me up, say, listen, we only run 2,000, but we sure like for you to come pastor. And I'll say, why don't you call Matthew Langdon, because I'm not about to get in a church that big. No, but I'm saying a lot of folks can. And when I mention that because it brought to mind a preacher we had one time, excellent preacher, wonderful person, great friend of mine. Wasn't very good at squirrel hunting, but I took him a few times, and we had a lot of fun. But he just could not be content because we had a small church, and he just needed something bigger. And I don't know where he's at today. I haven't talked to him in years, but last I heard, he was doing a lot of in and out of here, there, and all that. And maybe God moves people that fast, but I kind of think discontentment was a problem. And so I'm content, but that brings a problem for you folks, because I'll probably be here for the rest of my life. You have to put up with that, I guess. So, but contentment, we need to have it, and if the Lord allows, we'll talk maybe a little bit more about contentment next week. You're a fine bunch of folks. If you've got a prayer list now, we'll take a little time and pray over that. I do thank you for coming tonight, and for all the folks who stayed home because of ice and snow and fear of ice and snow, we pray that they get a little ice at their house. No, we're not going to do that. That was just a joke. But if some of them do now, they're going to blame it on me. But let's go to prayer.